Going to talk to you today about domain names, and this is something that I have some background in. And the reason I want to talk about this as one of my earlier tutorials is because it's one of those fundamental things that associations tend to forget about, especially when you're a smaller operation and you've only got a few people, and then somebody moves on. Then it's very hard to maintain a stable of domains consistently. Technology moves so fast, you could lose track of your domains. And the unfortunate thing about that is you could be in a situation where you don't have control of your own domain name. It could be controlled by the web host. It could be controlled by a contractor. It could be controlled by a former employee. What I want to emphasize to associations and nonprofits is you need to control your domain. And just to give you a little bit of background with me, I've managed as many as 30,000 domains over a 20-year period. I was a consultant for a pretty large company, Oakley Sunglasses, from 2001 to just a few years ago. And basically, they hired me to manage their domains. They found it was getting out of control, and they knew I knew a few things back in 2001 already. At that time, I already had over 100 domains that I had owned and managed, and so I already had a reputation with some friends and contacts there. Said, hey, this guy could do it. And so what I did is I helped them manage their portfolio and grow it basically from maybe 300 domains to well over 15,000 domains at its peak. And the reason it got so high is because of a number of lawsuits that they acquired all these domains from. So I needed to help import and manage all those. And so that was a big thing. And during that whole process, I learned a lot of best practices in the way that big companies manage domains. And it really is a very simple thing. There's a couple of fundamentals that you need to know about that you could basically manage your domain strategy similar to how Fortune 500 companies manage theirs. One of the things that we do is try to have your domains consolidated as much as possible. Yeah, you're probably going to have a couple of other registrars just because sometimes people in the company might register a domain name with one registrar, and you have a new director of a department and they register from another registrar. What you want to do is you want to consolidate as many of those into one or two as possible. I really wouldn't recommend more than three unless it was for a specific purpose. For Oakley, we probably had more than a dozen different registrars. But the reason for that is they had domains and brands throughout the world. And when I first started managing domains from them, a lot of the big registrars still had not consolidated a lot of these international top-level domains yet. So you had to register with the registrar in Italy and the registrar in Brazil and the registrar in Cyprus and all these places. And so it wasn't really until the last, I would say, 5+ years that a lot of the big players have started consolidating everything. Right now, I recommend two particular hosting providers or domain registrars. One is Enum, and the reason is because of their interface, and I'm familiar with them, so that's one. But lately, I've been consolidating everything into Google domains, and I really love their interface, and I'll share that stuff with you later on in a separate tutorial, because Google Domains has done a tremendous job setting up their interface so it really gives the owner ownership, and that's what you want. Now, let me first say that, with web hosts, for example, right here, typically what I've been finding lately is that they have been almost insisting that you transfer what they call name servers with these domains over to them. So what that, you want to avoid that. You don't want to transfer your name servers from the registrar to the web host. It's just not a good idea. Why? It's because you give the control of that domain over to that web host. That means that if you have email addresses that work off of the domain, you have other subdomains pointing to other web hosts, you have to consolidate everything through them. And you never want to be in that position, because the web host is just like any business. They can get bought out, they can go out of business, they can have bandwidth issues. And the last thing you want is your website to be down and then you don't have control of where you want to direct your main domain to. That could be thousands of dollars of business that you lose every day. You want to avoid that. So what I recommend is keep it with the registrar. So, with the registrar, again, like Google Domains or Enom or GoDaddy, probably the most popular one. I have some GoDaddy domains, and they're not terrible. I've found some issues with them, but that's a different video. You want to register, for this example, like mycompany.com, with that one registrar. And I'm going to show you. Kind of where I have one where I host some of my domains, and this is an example of Enom. This is Enom's interface. And so right now you can kind of see the domain overview. I manage everything here, and typically they call DNS server settings. And this is either DNS server settings or name servers. And you want to keep this with the registrar as much as possible, unless you're hosting your own rack space or your own servers. And then there's a good reason to do that. With Oakley, we eventually had to move over a lot of these things because they had so many servers that they absolutely had to have really deep controls of the DNS from the developer's standpoint. But if you're just a regular business and you have a handful of domains or even just one domain, again, you want to keep this with that registrar, whether that's GoDaddy or somebody else. What that does is it gives you control of this. This is called your DNS Zone Records. And with this, notice right now I've got it pointing to some other domains and all that. And this is not a domain I use actively from a website. I just use the email address. But here's a good example. I don't have a website under here, but I do use the email address. And so I've got a Google account, a Google Gmail account that's associated, that I get emails from. And in order for me to do that, I need to point these different variables using the CNAME record to Google settings. Well, again, if you put control of this into a web host or to a consultant or to somebody else, that's a lot of control, a lot of power you're giving that individual in that company. You want to retain as much of that leverage as possible. So when the consultant quits, or when you have to fire the consultant, or when the new employee moves on, or if the web host goes out of business, or they're having bandwidth issues, or if they were bought out, so many variables can come in that all of a sudden something that was reliable for a year is no longer reliable. You got to make the switch. This is the way to do it. The nice thing about this is, let's say these are existing websites I'm pointing it to, and then I change a new web host in a matter of 2 hours, less than that. I mean, in minutes, I can change the settings now. I can just go to the A records, put an IP address here, and then save, and then immediately, typically within minutes, this domain will point to the new web host very quickly. And there's different methodologies that web hosts use that allow you to point the domain over to them. If they act like they're insisting that you change the name servers, that is incorrect. If they're a legitimate web host, they will allow you to point your domain to them using your own DNS in your own registrar. And typically the way they do that is they have you change the IP address, and they'll give you an IP number. So it could be like, 215, 214.32, and I'm just coming up with these names, something like that. And they would point, and then you could point the www record and then the @ record. Again, I can go into the basics of this in a future video, but basically you can point that there. And then, or you would, if it was an A record, it would probably have to be an IP number, or it would be a CNAME record, like right here, where if let's say this domain, you wanted to go to it like mail.domaintechnician.com, I have this pointed over to the Google server. So right now, if I type in mail.domaintechnician.com, it'll go to that email address, or it'll go to that web address. So there's those two methods that allow you to have control of the domain that way. And if you look at my account here, again, I have most of my domains I actually control. There are instances where you need to control over them, but a lot of times in this stuff, it's probably, all of this is pretty much green. The majority of this stuff is green. So these are all of my domains in this one account. Now, the other thing is you want to have as few accounts as possible. I would recommend no less than 2, but no more than 4. And you probably are fine with 2. Lately I've been consolidating everything into Google. just because I've found that they work well, especially if you're going to do Google Analytics and Search Console. Their verification method for Google Analytics is instant if your domain is registered through Google Domains. Secondly, if you register through Google Domains, because it's Google, the domains are fairly inexpensive. Right now through Enum, if I want to register a domain, it's going to cost me $14 a year. It's not terrible, but every bit counts, right? If I register the same domain to Google, it's just $12 a year. Now, yeah, it's a couple of dollars, but if you're starting to have 10, 15, 20 domains, or in my case, a couple hundred, that adds up real fast. So I'm slowly migrating stuff over to Google Domains. But at the same time, some of the things I like to spread it out a little bit. But again, no more than really 2 or 3. So that's the other thing too, is retain control with the registrar so that you have control of the DNS and then just point those to the web hosts. So for this first rule, that's the thing I really want to pound into people, is the importance of retaining control of your domain. You do not have to transfer the entire name servers, or even worse, sometimes they insist on, or they act like they insist on making you transfer the entire domain over to them because they want you to pay them the domain fee every year. That's never a good idea. And one of the reasons why web hosts provide the service of saying, okay, you can sign up with us for like $20 a month or something, and with that we'll throw in a free domain name, right? Because they'll hook you in, and then you can pay for the domain name, and it pays for the domain name. So basically the cost to them is maybe $10. And then they give that to you for free for a year, but then they got you kind of, over the coals there. I mean, you can't, if you want to transfer out, it depends on the web host. It can be more difficult. According to the rules of the domain authorities, you should be able to get an authentication code and be able to transfer out easily enough. And for the most part, I've been able to do that. But I also know that there's a lot of unwieldy hosts out there that make it difficult for average people to be able to transfer out domains. My point is, don't even be in that situation. Just control the domains, retain control of domains. It's better for the long run. It gives you more control. And in the future videos regarding domains, I'll be sharing more insights on the best ways to manage this. And I'll show you my Google account and some of the other things that I manage, and some of the tricks and best practices I've learned over the years. So with that, hope you got a lot of this video. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, please subscribe now. And if you have comments, suggestions, or anything, feel free to comment below. Thank you very much.